This is an Amper Sounds production.
What is feminism for you in 2025?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think there's a few aspects to it. I suppose there's a question of what is the movement feminism, what's that doing now? And there's a question of what feminism could be or should be, right? And maybe there's a slightly different questions. I think if I were to come up with a definition, it's about, but then these just need more definitions. It's about liberation, overcoming the ways in which gender limits.
Amelia Horgan, everyone!
Hey.
Welcome, hey.
Thank you so much.
How's it going?
I had my birthday recently, and there's a bit...
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. There's a bit, if you do an event in South, when everyone from North has assumed a North journey time, they all start messaging you at once, being like, it's going to be an hour, and I'm like, yeah, you got to check. I checked the night before how long it's going to take to get somewhere, because otherwise you do that. And I got screenshots of people's city mapper saying like, it's going to take a while. And I was like, well, of course. Do you think?
I mean, but looking at the night before is kind of giving...
It's giving neurotic.
No, it's kind of giving living in the North.
Oh, I know. I mean, it might take less time. Sometimes like an hour and a half journey.
I mean, that is kind of crazy. Although, if you live in East London and North East London, that is quite a ball ache to get to places because you're dependent on the overground,
Exactly.
which is like fucking really annoying.
It's annoying. Or like the Thames link just doesn't work sometimes. Sometimes it's like, no, don't feel it today. No, I'm not going to bother.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good.
Do you feel that? Do you say your age?
I can say my age.
So I
can say my age. It's the Jesus age, 33.
Oh yeah, that's a fun age.
Right?
That's the age you're going to be in heaven, isn't it?
Oh really?
Well, I assume, isn't it?
I don't know.
That's the age that
I'm
we all
not
turn
a
up at
theologian.
heaven.
Oh, so
heaven
you all arrived Jesus age. 33.
I think so. Maybe. Did I just made it up? Maybe I made it up.
That's
what I assume. Because obviously, if you die at 84, kind of like cancer or whatever. You want to be 33, not fucking 84, like in heaven.
Although 33 in the past, I guess, would be older, but maybe not. I don't know what it would be like to be 33 in different moments of time. But I feel good being 33.
Well, you're peak human.
Peak human.
No, are you? But do you know what? Did you see that thing about the brain now only develops at like 30, yeah, something like that? What's that about?
There are these. It seems like there are these bits. Well, based on my reading of the article, there are like these moments where the line really goes down quite dramatically in terms of age or goes up. Like aging happens, I think we imagine it as this like ongoing process, but there are times at which the speed of aging goes really...
Yeah.
I mean, actually, this is probably my biggest toxic trait, is that I actually am surprisingly into this weird Silicon Valley anti-aging stuff.
I'm kind of obsessed with it as well.
Honestly, if someone gave me one of those like £200 weekend IV drips, I would in a second take it.
So you're a fan of this Brian Johnson guy?
I think at first everyone was very anti, seemed chilling. His desire for young blood seemed scary. His desire to live forever. But now I think there's something there. A friend just did a podcast about this stuff basically, and people are spending so much money. I just get some.
What was it? What's the podcast?
The FT one on like, can we stop aging basically, and what does that look like? But I mean, there's the uncanny valley aspect, right? And you see that with the Brian Johnson, or you see it in Kris Jenner looking sort of like no age at all. But then there's the sort of figuring out the science of aging and seeing if that can be slowed. But I guess this question, can we live forever? No.
Well, yeah. On the one hand, I am like, these people are insane, but on the other hand, I do have my fingers crossed that it will work. Do you know what I mean? I feel like the facelifts that are going to be around when we're 50 are going to be fucking insane. There's going to be 30-year-olds walking around, they're going to be like 70.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And also there is some really interesting stuff about dementia as well, apparently there's people older than us will still get dementia, but they might get close to a cure by the time we're old.
Oh wow.
So as much as there's a sense of doom and gloom about the future, we're going to have perfect faces. And they're working on some of this. So it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. It's I guess there's a bit of a hype mill around, especially the really unlicensed medical space of these supplements and things. But they're finessing some of these things.
I mean, there will come a time when you're just done. Where you're kind of like,
I think
I'm tired.
That's the thing that I find maybe chilling about this stopping death thing, is the desire. I mean, maybe it's a very human desire. It's always been this fantasy that we could just outlive our material neediness and go beyond that and live past our time, right? Live forever. And there's that in the Brian Johnson thing where you're like, oh, do you actually want to live forever? And then there's the bit which is like, do you just want to slow down the process of aging? But I mean, it seems like there have to be natural limits to things, right? There's natural limits to the day, there's natural limits to a lifetime, and you might be able to extend, but sometimes there's an end.
Yeah, of course there's an end, and also like, your brain and how you perceive the world changes as you get older, right?
Yeah.
The more and time goes faster, I guess.
Yes.
They say time goes faster. So what if you're kind of like, you've got the body of a 40-year-old and you're actually 150, years just flying by because like nothing actually means anything to you anymore.
Yeah, the point about time is really interesting. I remember being a kid and being told I had to wait 10 minutes for something. I was like, that's impossible. I was like, how can I wait 10 minutes? Whereas 10 minutes now, nothing.
Well, if you think about how long school was.
Oh, so long.
In general.
So long. It would get to lunchtime, you'd be like, got to do this all again.
Yeah, and you finish at 3:30.
Right? Yeah.
I know.
It's early. Whereas now a day can go by in a blink, months, in seconds.
What were you like in school?
I was very well behaved.
Were you? I can kind of.
I was well behaved. I've got that first to put their hand up when the question's asked.
Be precocious.
Oh, I was very precocious. It was a miracle I was not seriously bullied. What I like to do is write plays and make the other children perform in them.
Oh my God. Wait, how old was this happening?
Year 2 was my first, was
Okay.
my directorial debut. And I did a gender swap Peter Pan, where I was Peter Pan. And my little sort of class rival came up to me afterwards and he said, I remember this as my first serious criticism. He said, that lacked plot.
Wait, what fucking school did you go to?
It's in Hampstead.
Okay.
He said it lacked plot. I don't know why the teacher let me do this in front of the other students. I don't think it was maybe not the best of ideas. And then
Wait, so I love that you, like, this is a core memory
This is a core-
of you
yeah,
being
yeah.
insulted, of your fucking masterpiece being criticised. You remember his face, you remember the
his
smells.
face. I remember that kid, I mean, I had no idea what he's doing now. I'm sure he's criticising people left, right and centre.
He's not doing as well as you.
He's-
That's the most
he might
important
be
thing.
doing better.
He might be doing better.
He might be
yeah.
doing better. You never know. And then by sort of 11, my writing fell off. But I had done a lot of other little things. In year 7, I was really proud of this little musical I wrote, which was about the peasants' revolt.
I mean,
I know, it's very precocious behaviour. I don't know how. I think I was very cute, so it was okay. I think if I had been a tiny bit less
I mean,
cute,
it is kind of like that is a lot.
It's a lot.
You know
It's a
what I
lot.
mean? I'm surprised you didn't get into playwriting.
No, I didn't. I stopped because I discovered 2 things when I was a teenager that have thrown me off the creative space, which is politics and boys.
Okay.
And those kept me away from it. But I am actually now, I'm writing my first ever short story, which
Oh, great.
hopefully we'll be reading in a few weeks. So I'm trying again, but I moved away from that kind of stuff. I think I realised after doing the play that I was the musical about the peasants' revolt, that I was sailing very close to the sun in terms of like being not respected by my peers. I was like, okay, it's got all 3. It's got like doing extra work at school for no reason, unasked for. Oh God, because it's my birthday, right? So my mum told me, I was like, Mum, tell me a story about when I was a kid. She was like, oh, you would come home about 7 years old and you would set yourself extra homework because there wasn't enough for you at school. You'd sit down and I'd make her time me doing extra tests, and I'd just say, come in.
Oh my God, poor woman.
So, I know, poor her. I was the only daughter though, so you get a lot of latitude.
What did your mum do? Or does?
Interesting. My mum worked in my school, in my primary school.
Oh, really?
I know. So my mum, when I was in reception, was a teaching assistant in the class, and there is a photo of me. They hadn't introduced school uniform. They were slowly drip feeding in the school uniform, right? But there's a picture of me, reception, my mum standing there, teaching assistant, me in the school uniform, no one else wearing it. I was like, I was being set up to fail. But she worked...
succeed.
Oh, well, yeah. Or to be...
In a different way.
Oh, but the
not,
risk
not,
of
not
being...
fail in life
Not fail in
of
life.
school.
Do really well at school. Do be very keen. But I think that keenness of having my mum in the class, that never went away because I was like, And also one of the most embarrassing things you can do as a kid is call the teacher mum. Imagine your actual mum is in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right?
So what did that... do for you? So you liked school, right? You liked the structure of school. You liked the tasks.
Yeah, I liked it a lot when I first got there. I enjoyed it, and then I had some like difficult family stuff, and school was a bit of an escape from that.
Okay. Even though your mum was there watching you.
So even though she was there, she was always there. I liked it a lot, but I was very well behaved. There was one rebellion in primary school, which is that I set off the fire alarm, but I wasn't caught, and I tried to own up. And I wasn't believed.
That's quite exciting.
No, I know. Because what I wanted, it said press to break glass.
Oh my God, did they like get the naughty boy and suspend him and you were like,
They
it was me.
They were like, at that time, because it was peak Blairism, PFI money everywhere. They were building a library for the school. It looked like a mini version of Stansted Airport, like that kind of Blair... public-private finance money. So they're building this. So there were building works going on. And they were like, oh, must have been the builders. And I was like, it was me. I did it.
And you're confessing now. You're confessing, please. Give me that detention. I deserve it.
Hampstead Parochial School must have been what? Like 1999, 2000. The fire alarm, that was me. Did it. I did that.
You hear that?
I'm confessing. It was
Wait,
me.
so did this kind of vibe of school continue into high school?
Yeah, I think a bit, not as much. I discovered that you could go to parties, and I remember being about 14 and lamenting my pre-puberty brain and thinking, God, I would do extra homework, whereas now then like I was like, well, I want to go to a party and meet boys, have fun. I remember that I used to be when I began secondary school on the bus on the way to school, I would like sit there and practice verbs in French. I'd conjugate verbs. But by the time I got to GCSEs, I was like, I would go the longer route to go past the boys' school to see the boys. So,
did you go to a girls' school?
Yeah, I went to a girls' school.
I mean, I feel like that kind of happens though, right?
It does. I lament that childhood brain of like pure focus
on the task at hand.
But as you get older, you can try and be impressive to impress them.
Well, I remember as a child that I was really keen to like impress adults, and I was scared of children. But then something happened at 12 or 13 where I needed to no longer impress adults. And I think that adults failed me enough times where like their authority didn't really mean anything to me anymore.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was trying to impress everyone around me, or I was trying to like give you an impression of me that was either leave me alone or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And nothing felt real to me.
Interesting.
Even to the point of GCSEs did not feel real to me.
It was just like something was happening.
Yeah. And like even in my history GCSE, I fucking wrote a short story.
Really?
Yeah, my history teacher came out of the exam and was like, "What?" And obviously picked it up and saw it and was like, "What the fuck did you do?"
Was it a historical story?
Yeah. It was about kind of like what if like it was about if the Nazis tried to like resurrect Hitler's body and like bring him back and like try again.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
and what we'd have to do because
fantasy.
I really hated World War II.
Okay.
And I was forced to do it, but I loved history, but I hated World War II. But you have to do it in GCSE, like it's the most important bit.
They also
I find it so boring.
The whole of school they teach you about World War II. I remember when in primary school when after the invasion of Afghanistan, this girl next to me in school turned to me and was like, "Are we going to be evacuated now?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?"
You stupid girl! You being 7 years old, you stupid girl! Like 3,000 miles away, you idiot!
but that fear, that somehow suddenly we'd be like taken to the country because we're in London, like taken to the countryside. And I think that's all we learned.
But I mean, like that's probably indicative of her family, right? Because we were told, what was it? The sexed up dossier that it was like 45 minutes for them to like hit us or something like that.
It is interesting that moment, I think, and for people, I guess, of our kind of age, it's like that distrust of authority is quite strong already from quite young, right? Because sexed up dossier is that word was everywhere. And also the sense of, you had these, I remember all of the footage of the protests, of the anti-war movement of people, millions in the street, right? And nothing changes. So that knowledge that on some issues, actually, you can have this huge public strength of feeling. You can have everyone saying, no, we don't want this. And then the thing happens anyway, right? And what do you do politically with that knowledge? and there's echoes of it now with the genocide in Gaza, right, where you have the majority of people supporting a full arms embargo, and it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make any significant difference what people are doing in terms of just public opinion, whereas public opinion on other issues, it's like becomes a kind of point of obsession, and the way that what is sayable or thinkable or how that's kind of articulated in the press. I think that sense of people can want something, and that democratically isn't realized, I think really stayed with me from that age. I don't know if you experienced that too.
Yeah, but I think that feeling has stayed with the general public, and it's kind of at the core of what is essentially rotting our society, Western society, really, where everything's becoming kind of more and more nihilistic, where nothing really means anything, and so everyone's going more and more batshit, essentially. But funny enough, I have gained a proper, like, I still occasionally go to protests, and like my mum is like full on every week. She's a part of like the organizing team of these like protests, and but I found at some point, I've been going to protests since I was a kid. My mum used to take me to anti-fascist marches, Iraq War, all through, and I found myself in these last 2 years at marches, chanting the same things, hearing the same people, and not really getting anywhere. And I was kind of thinking, what are we actually doing? What do you have an answer for what we're doing, like on the street every Saturday?
Yeah, I guess there's a kind of feeling of ritual when you go to them, as in there's the same thing over and over again, and the same people. I will say especially with the Palestine demos, what was really important there was that it often wasn't the same people, right?
Yeah.
You saw this kind of, what I think is a really, really important popular anti-imperialism, where you have a kind of multiracial working class, then you have the kind of people who are already politicized, so especially people of our parents' generation, people of our generation, who are already kind of looped into the left, but you had these mass movements, and often from quite surprising people, and in which the level of consciousness about what was going on, not just in Gaza, but the whole of Palestine, was really, really high. And people were coming through stuff they'd organized in their workplace, especially in the NHS, especially teachers, and that kind of organizing that comes through those other collective sites is really important. The demos, I suppose most pessimistically, I'd say people go because they felt there was nothing else that they could do, that they wanted to do something. I guess there's a sort of standard liberal account, which is like, we're making our voices heard. And then there's maybe something which is less pessimistic than that, which was that being around people, raising the level of consciousness, trying to push the forms of what the protest is. There was that going on too. So a lot of people would be doing chanting in Arabic or displays of Palestinian culture and stuff like that. And that kind of thing, I think, is really important in that moment, or in this moment, because you're seeing the destruction, the purpose of destruction of an entire culture and an entire people. So showing that and kind of pushing against the demo form. But these kind of marches from one place to another alone, I mean, as we've seen, it keeps things on the agenda, right? But that's about it. And it gives us somewhere to channel that frustration. Instead, I guess what people could do, and it's so hard, but I think we have to really put this in the context of the loss of power of the left. And I think this relates to what you're saying about nihilism and culture and meaning, but it's also about the power that people are able to wield. So we think about, what's happened in the past few decades in Britain is we used to have a very, very powerful organised left, right? Unions brought down governments. Right? This is something that happened in this country. Whereas now, there are people who are in unions, but in terms of the actual power to scare people in charge, we don't really have that. We have bits of public opinion we can sway, on some issues. But I think what happened with Palestine and the question of imperialism is we saw the really sharp limits of that. Even on issues where the government isn't particularly keen to move, but something like I don't know, nationalisation and water. Everyone hates Thames Water. Public opinion against these private water companies is really high. And the government is sometimes acting as if it might do something. Maybe, it's being floated, this kind of stuff. So there is a kind of responsiveness. But basically with things like imperialism, we can see that where those decisions are made, what's kind of convenient for American interests and for British imperial interests and so on, there's so much less that we can do. And there are people who do direct action and put pressure on in different ways. And I think that's really commendable. But I think the main point I want to make there is just that it really shows the hard limits of what's democratically possible unless you have like an actual countervailing force against the power of whether that is the establishment in its various different forms and the military and so on and as an industry and so it's like, in absence of something which can actually bend power, what can we do? Well, we can raise consciousness, we can push on the weaker points of the system, but the bigger task, and this is what everyone always says, but I think that doesn't mean it's not true, is to rebuild that kind of class power and that kind of more powerful organised left.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think actually from people I've spoken to who found the marches themselves very useful is the connections and community that they found. And then they found themselves positions in the kind of a cog in the machine of resistance, essentially, and kind of going, where can I organise? Exactly. Where can I be useful? What skills do I have? And how can I help in any given way? And I think a lot of people found the experience of being gaslit by the mainstream media and by the establishment about what's happening in Palestine to be very frustrating and difficult, particularly people who have personal connections towards Palestine. So that kind of making myself useful is how you keep sane, essentially, and how you stop that nihilism. And how are people... Do you think there is a hope for an organised left to kind of have a resurgence? Because I feel like the left that we've had that's had a resurgence has been very either academic or kind of internet based and not actually, and that's why it could be so easily destroyed. Whereas like it took like 10 years of kind of class warfare from Thatcher to destroy the left before, or the organised left. But we kind of like lose an election and we're in fucking chaos. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, just very quickly on that useful point, I think that's completely right, that there's this sense of like, what can I do? What can I contribute? We've all got a bunch of skills. And the point is to take up a position in the machine against the machine, right? And to be an irritant in the normal functioning of life. As for the prospects for rebuilding the left, okay, so I guess the one thing to say is, we've gotten bad at losing. We've lost. And one trick, because there's going to be many more defeats for us in the future, is to figure out how we come back from that. Because we had this defeat of this thing, left populism, Corbynism, however we want to understand it, in 2019. Okay, then we did have the pandemic and everyone was locked in their homes for a bit, or like limited in what we could do. But a lot of us were sitting around waiting for the people at the top table to make those decisions, waiting for someone to shoot that firing gun and say, okay, and this is what we're going to do. And we didn't really try and rebuild a huge amount in that time. That's not true of everyone, but I think in terms of people who are involved in this project, and that sense of, okay, what can I do? How can I be useful? Where should I put myself? Is the question we need to be asking ourselves. I think we've seen, we've kind of, with your party, we've speed run the tragedy into fast. Right? You have something which has like over 500,000 members, now 50,000, and one of the challenges, I think, is building these longer term institutions, building up what those look like and restoring the ones that we had. And I think there's a really common, it's not exactly an error, but a kind of seductive mistake, which is like, if something gets lots of hits, people like it and it's changing things, right? Yeah. And you see also that there's a really strange version of this where something will be really popular, or like someone talking about something will be really popular, and people will say, oh, this is going to be great because I imagine that people will like this. So it's sort of as if we're all...
Wait, explain that a little.
So there'll be like a video of someone talking about an issue or something, right? And people will not say, oh, I like this. This explains something well. They'll say, this will explain it well for everyone else. This imagined kind of public out there who are just waiting to be kind of peeled off or convinced. And I think that this speaks to a few different kind of weaknesses. One is that we've all appointed ourselves social media managers of the left rather than thinking like, where is the power? Where are the people? Of course, this stuff really matters, right? It's not, I think we can't just say, oh, get off the internet. It doesn't work. Get off the internet, comrades. There's no point being on there. Because this is where people interact with the world, so much so that it doesn't even make sense to talk about these things as separate. But at the same time, we can't lose sight of how to bring people together and make them act, right? And
100%. I actually so agree with that, in that the left and the liberals on the left are dazzled by personalities, and they think that a personality is going to save them. And actually, the personality at any given time is a tool for the movement, not the savior of the movement. And you think, oh, if so and so, and I don't like criticizing anyone, because I feel like everyone is quite useful if they're if they're pushing forward the message. But if so and so talks in a certain accent, then he's gonna be able to get through to certain people. And oh, that person's really articulate, or this person is like more masculine. This has been the thing right now. And you're actually kind of like forgetting that, like, the right, for example, particularly in America, it's not just organized online. It is, but they have online communities that have been nurturing for about a decade and a half now. But also, like, the Christian right is like in communities in the way that, like, the EDL is like in communities, in kind of football communities, in a way that, like, just having the right person with the right look on YouTube is not going to fucking solve the problem.
Exactly. And also, like, there's another problem in that, which is, what are we actually asking people to do? It's one thing to have someone go out there and say something really well, but what are they saying, and what's actually going to happen as a result? What are we making people do? Because if we're just producing entertainment, you know, I suppose there's worse entertainment people could be watching, but you know, we're trying to make people act in a particular way in the world. And I think the model we've got, which is making things for people to watch, and also there's a really important thing, and this is a really hard thing for us to fight, right? But the extent to which social media platforms channel our attention and change the way we use our attention, right? So people individually watch content, and that content could be good or not good, right? But let's say they could be watching some kind of horrible manosphere thing, or they could be watching something positive. But even if we get them onto the positive thing, it's still a really passive mode of engaging. Like, you have a video that you watch, and it's not something where you're making meaning or consciousness about the world with other people. Whereas if you compare that to the kinds of activities people would do in really high points of trade union activity, where you'd be on a strike and you'd make sense of the world with your fellow workers, or in feminist conscious raising, or like consciousness raising groups, where you'd sit down and you'd talk and you say, this happened, how do we understand this? Having someone just like to camera tell you what's wrong and being like, okay, now I've understood, is a very different thing to learning how to think and how to act. And those kind of skills are ones that the left like developed, right? Of how do we make sense of the world? How do we really think, rather than just thinking slogans and comms and advertising for the movement? Like, to actually think requires collective life. And what we have instead is a real, a privatization that comes from this content, in the sense of people are sitting alone in their room on their phone. They might send stuff to people sometimes, but there's not that. This sounds like a bit wishy-washy and liberal. I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean like we should just talk to people. But there's something that happens when people think together.
No, I completely agree.
Right? Which you don't get when people are just like, yeah.
So how do you make that work, though? How does that...
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean...
I do think there is this, and like, look, I can't say much. I'm sitting here, I'm trying to get podcasts off the ground. Like, there is this kind of ego thing where, well, on the one hand, you think, oh, if I've watched a video, like, I think it's very good, like, people like Navarro who cover Palestine in a way that almost no other British media organization is covering it. And so, therefore, there is a valve for kind of people who are thinking this, are seeing this with their eyes, seeing it through the internet, and no one is articulating it for them. But there can be this kind of thing, well, oh, I've liked this video, I've done my bit now. Or I've shared this thing online, I've done my bit now.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the utility of people like Navarra, like Owen Jones, like whoever kind of person out there like Ash and yourself and stuff like that are... The utility is giving us ways to articulate our positions in our lives rather than just kind of like... Because I'm not changing anyone's mind by sharing something on Instagram, but I make myself think that like I need to do a statement. It's the way that like micro-influencers are doing statements. It's kind of like no one needs a fucking statement from you. You're not the Prime Minister.
Yes.
But what they can help us do, and not just micro-influencers, but anyone on the online left, is help us articulate left-wing ideas.
I think that's right. I think there's something to be said about giving people a way of making sense of the world, because people, I think, have a feeling that something is wrong. They have a feeling that, terrible things are happening, right? And they're very angry, and they're right to be angry. And the way that people have of making sense of the world is, it might be limited by the stuff that they're hearing in the mainstream media, or they might not have those kind of interactions with people where they can together make sense of the world. So the work that people can do, a way of being useful, is to say, okay, here's one way of looking at it. When it really contributes, I think, is when it does the thing you identify, which is saying something that other people aren't saying, but I think also saying something new, because there are so many events, especially left-wing ones, you go to and you're like, I've heard this before. And obviously, and that's another thing that kind of, I guess, a kind of content model does, is that it rewards repetition, and rewards repetition in form and content. The same music, the same opener, the same whatever. But saying something that people genuinely haven't heard and are surprised by can do something, can shake up the way in which the world appears familiar and smooth, and change that, and do something to dislocate everyday life. And I think there's something really important to that. I think the sort of the next step of it is people are doing this kind of stuff, and I really commend them for it, is setting up reading groups, setting up discussion groups, setting up these activities where people think and act together. It's hard though, because, well, it's expensive to book places, right? I mean, that sounds like a trivial matter, but in London it's not, and people are so busy, and they would normally be doing, that at different times in history they'd be doing this stuff at work, or like in a union or whatever. But there's such a long history of, especially working class kind of autodidact culture, of people just going off and like just reading and learning and teaching themselves things. And I think one thing that, I guess, as people who are putting ideas out there, is to encourage people to not feel it's done when they finish watching, is to like talk to people about it and think with people about it, and have kind of high standards for themselves in thinking and reading and challenging themselves, because that's one thing that I think it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard when you have so much competition for your attention, to sit down and think about how to make sense of the world. But people really, really want to as well. And I think that's why we see such interest in this kind of stuff, right? Well, why people will watch these long videos online, these video essays about all kinds of topics, is because they want to make sense of the world. And that really human and really beautiful impulse to make meaning collectively and to be able to contribute to that is an amazing thing. I guess the next step is to channel it into things which are a bit more durable than seeing things online, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your own political journey, right? Okay. You said that you discovered politics in high school.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you? Well,
so my time in school was quite strange. So I had a bursary to a fancy girls private school. And I know everyone says I had a bursary, and what they mean is I got 10% off, but my family wasn't wealthy. My mum was a teaching assistant, single mum. We lived in a council estate, whatever. So my experience of this thing, class, was mediated by going to this school where everyone else was by and large extremely wealthy, and I wasn't. And this was also at the time of, that very vicious noughties culture where to be working class, to live on a council estate, all of these things were things looked down on, right? ASBOs and blah 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 blah. So my experience of the world was shaped by this feeling that there was an expectation that I should feel less than because of my background, because of my family not being wealthy, but then being in this environment where everyone in those kinds of schools is told, you're amazing, you're going to be everything in the world, like every door is going to open for you. And this kind of complicating factor, and seeing the differences in life chances for the people in those schools compared to my own family was a pretty radicalizing experience. So that kind of shaped it. I also just I really loved debating. I always, when I was a teen, I was so annoying. I can't imagine how annoying I must have been. All I wanted to do was like win debates with people. So whether that was about like Blair and Brown and the Iraq War, or or about Palestine and different parts of that kind of history at that, all I wanted to do was win every fight. So I just thought, this is a way where you can make sense of the world, but also win arguments, which is what I wanted to do as a teenager. So it was that. And then when after my parents got divorced, my mum ended up in an abusive relationship, in a violent relationship. And that sense that people can be, that the harm that people can do to each other, and the kind of the real violence that's present in the world, and the fact that some people are in groups where that violence is made easier to do to them, right? Whether that's because they're a woman, because they're a single mom, because they're not wealthy, all of these things. That sense that in the world is set up in a way that some people are more likely to experience violence, and that violence is just a structural part of their lives. I think I found that obviously very, very upsetting, and that I think radicalized me in a way that and also because if you're growing up in that kind of environment.
So how old were you at this point?
So my mum, I was like 8, 9.
So you were in the house as well?
Yeah. So, and that's a really hard thing for kids to be around. There's a lot more, I think, awareness about it now in schools, especially. But it's a hard thing to grow up around, right? And we were, as these things go, quite lucky. We had lots of, lots of support from lots of services, and managed to sort of fully get out by the time I was like a young teenager. But that's also speaks to the possibilities at that time. Like the council gave us another flat, we were able to move, all of these kinds of things. Yeah. Whereas now, the chances of doing that are very different. The escape routes are so limited. Because of the housing crisis, cuts to benefits, it's much harder to leave, right? So that feeling that people are always one step away, or the possibility of being one step away from something totally devastating happening, right? That feeling that life isn't always the secure thing, that you can, there's no difference between you really and someone who's really struggling, who's homeless, who has addiction problems, all of these things, that there's just one bad choice, a few bad choices, or a few bad things happening to you away from that feeling of the world being precarious, and that some people being exposed more to that violence, I think was very present when I was a kid. It also is that feeling that if you grow up in a home with violence, or all forms of abuse, you're not really supposed to be talking about it, right? So this feeling of knowing something's wrong, wanting to say something's wrong, but not being able to, I think I found so upsetting that as soon as I felt oh, now I'm in a position to say. That feeling that like if something fucked up's happening, you can be like, no, this is fucked up. That kind of need to say that something bad is going on, I think stayed with me a lot.
Okay.
So a combination of that kind of class experience, and I think this is that class experience is very common for people who are in this weird position where you don't really belong anywhere. Like you don't really belong anymore with your family, but you don't belong in this new class you've been kind of pushed into. And that feeling of not quite fitting in anywhere, combined with this feeling that if something's wrong, you should say, because if you've had the experience of not being able to say, there's nothing better than one day being able to say, right? Plus this sort of knowledge that there are certain groups, and especially women, who can be put in a position where violence is more likely. Those three things together, I think, really pushed me to a particular orientation towards power, as well as the kind of politics that were just also, I guess, a bit in the air at the time, especially after, in the wake of the anti-war movement, but a kind of a desire to speak and a distrust of I guess, the official sort of narrative, I guess. But I was very young, so that's maybe too sophisticated.
No, I mean, like, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot. I wonder if you... Because I think when things happen to you as a child, I guess... Actually, what starts happening to you as a teenager is you start to understand it more, and you start to realize how bad things actually were. Even if it stopped, you're kind of processing it as an adult, and you start to look around and think, wow, what would I have to be like to do that or to experience that? And you kind of get almost... I don't want to say re-traumatized, but you start to experience it again because you start to process it. And did you go through any of that? And where did you channel that energy? Did you channel that into... The reason I'm asking is, in my experience, school became totally irrelevant to me at that point. And I fucked off my GCSEs and I fucked off school. And but you seem to have put your energy into
school, and I think it's also quite gendered, because I think as a girl, being good at school is something that's not necessarily expected of you, but it's seen as like it's not socially sanctioned, it's socially condoned. If you're a girl, you're allowed to be you're allowed to kind of like school a bit, and I was good at school, and that was the thing that took me out of the family as well. So for me, I put it into school. I think that's so right about reflect when you're a bit of an older child and you look back and you're like, wow, I was pretty young then. But I think it's when you're a child, you don't necessarily feel that you're in this separate category child, especially if you're a child who's having to act in some ways as an adult, right? Or being exposed to things that children might not be. So you don't feel like I'm a child and I'm in the world of children. You feel like, or it's a bit like, when you're...
Wait, do you not?
I didn't. Did you feel like a child?
The reason I do that, the reason I felt like that is because I felt like I didn't belong in the realm of children. And I was desperate to be in the adult world. And actually I felt like I was in Lord of the Flies. I was like, you're going to leave me with these lot, like these crazy kids.
Like, let me be up there.
Yeah, basically.
I think what I wonder is, but it's also because I was the eldest. I was the eldest, and of sort of all of my cousins, I was also the eldest. So I was always sort of a bit in between. And I loved it when I got to sit on the grown-ups table rather than the children's table. And I was like, this is where I belong, on the grown-ups table. But I think it was that feeling of looking back and thinking, okay, wow, I was pretty young when these things happened. I mean, quite recently, a few years ago, I did this thing where you can do like a subject, like an FOI on yourself. You can ask like the council or whatever. Yeah, so they can give you the things. And that was that kind of, in a way, that experience of looking at it and thinking, oh my God, I was so young when this was happening. And the way having it written by, by someone else is quite different, because it's an external observer and you don't have your sense of yourself as someone who is either in this in-between thing of like not a child, not an adult, but something else, or you're not in that family constellation. You have someone looking from the outside and you're like, whoa, this is pretty bad, and I was pretty young. And that was quite an interesting experience to see it from the outside like that, because that view is not really possible even if you're looking back when you were young, I think.
There was something you said about what happened when you got this bursary or this scholarship, I can't remember what you said,
Yeah.
and how you felt like you were no longer part of this class of where your family was from, but you weren't in this new class world that you were in. And I actually thought that was quite analogous of the left in general and some of the limitations that the left have faced in the fact that you got a lot of people who feel attached to the working class and want to help the working class, but actually to a lot of people on the left, working class is a word in a book. Do you know what I mean? And actually it's constantly, even you just see like the early kind of Russian revolutionaries, like how are we going to get out there and if I can get these people to understand that we're going to liberate you and all of this stuff. I found that I find that quite fascinating. So you had this kind of worldview, right?
Yeah.
And you had this kind of position you found yourself in. At what point did you start to read and go, oh, this is what I believe in. This is what I've been sensing.
I do remember reading the Communist Manifesto when I was 17, obviously. But it's the prose is great. I remember sitting on the 214 bus home from school and reading it and being like, whoa, this is amazing, right? Or this sense of this is what this thing history has been. It's been this struggle between the classes. This is what's happening. And I was like, whoa. I think that sense of, okay, how do I make sense of the world probably came more at university when I was doing student politics. And then you're thinking together and you're taking information and joining things up in a way that less so with individual reading. But I remember reading that and thinking like, whoa, like the world changes when you have that, when you I don't know, things are one way and then they're not another way. It's like falling in love, right? It's this sort of like, there are some things where when you learn them, you feel as if you've known them always, right? That there couldn't have been a time when you didn't know this. And it felt like that with that. And I think on this point about this sort of ambiguous relation of not being in one place, not being in another, feeling as if you can't really speak for the group you've left or like the working class. I think that is this common experience of these people who've kind of travelled class, including me. And I think that's one of the kind of structural problems that we had within this sort of left populist movement or moment that's now shifting, was you'd have basically a bunch of people like us who would go somewhere in the country and knock on the door and say, we're here for the local Labour Party. We might not even know what that place was. Like we all just got on a coach and we're like, well, what's this place we're in? And I think a kind of, and it doesn't come from a bad place, but a kind of almost charity orientation towards that. And I think that there's a lot to think about in terms of this, because most people, when they encounter the world, ordinary people, however we want to describe them, working class people, you have a lot of people telling you what to do and how to live your life, and whether it's your manager, teachers in school, whoever it is, saying, this is how you're going to do things. Listen to me. I know better than you. And that feeling is a really real one. The way that it's spoken about, I think, is in a way which is often quite reactionary or troubling. This idea that like, we don't want any experts, or therefore, it's like this sort of like the problem is just this liberal elite. But I think that feeling of being spoken down to makes up so much people's lives. The important question is also not then like don't bother speaking, but actually what do we do? What do we do about that? And how do we rebuild those institutions? And also that doesn't therefore just mean, okay, well, we have to just, and this is often where people take this conclusion, is like, well, it's that people hate woke or hate all of this stuff. Like, there's no reason to think that, or it doesn't follow from that, this feeling of being spoken down to, because the feeling of being spoken down to could have all kinds of things about which, like, that's the feeling of being brutalized by the world. It doesn't lead to any obvious like sense of what those people's political beliefs would be, if that makes sense. There's this really frantic attempt to project all kinds of views onto ordinary people, and that's I think where we can really go wrong. But I think this sort of charity or that orientation towards people is a really serious problem. But I think people are often too hasty with what conclusions we can draw from like political conclusions in terms of what people think or should say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There is definitely a projection, and then you kind of try and do working class whisperer and get kind of like, how are we going to get the right person to do the right thing? And I think what I found quite interesting about what's going on in America with the left, because look, the fact of the matter is that people were talking down to people, and the problem that the left has is that we are closely aligned to liberals. So most people will be like, oh, there is a left-wing bias at the BBC. It's like, well, no, there's like an establishment liberal kind of bias, because that's who has been the establishment for the last 20 years. And the BBC will lean towards whoever's got the most power, I guess. But what's happening in America, which I think we need to look at, is the left is getting candidates from the communities, so you don't have to get a bunch of people being like, how do we talk to people in fucking Stoke? You just get a fucking person from Stoke to run, and they don't have to do all this kind of second guessing. They know what life is like. I guess
I think that's right. And I think the sort of activity of the, as you put it so well, the working class whispering gets us nowhere, and actually thinking, well, what are people doing? Who are people doing things in their communities? And why is it that there's a gap between what they're doing and what we as the left are doing? If there is one, there isn't always one. But people are setting up really impressive things in their communities, and those are the kind of people that we should be kind of looking to as well. And I think another thing that's really important is the left does, not everyone. There's a certain fetishization of this thing, community, which is this thing which is out there and that other people have, right? But actually, it's what you said. It's like, we need to think about what people are actually doing, where they live, and how that joins up to everything else, rather than like, oh, out there's this amazing thing, and if we could just discover it, we just have to go into there and find it. And actually also, I guess, think about the extent to which community is so eroded by the kinds of changes we've seen economically and politically, that possibility of what that looks like. I think sometimes we have in our head a version of community that looks like the kind of civic life or community life that was possible a few decades ago. But actually this is not.
What do you mean by that? In
the sense of like, people have free time, people have spaces where they can meet, that there's stuff going on. Now there still are, right? There still are. This isn't to say that there aren't. There are places where people meet, and there are these things. But I guess in the kind of high point of British social democracy, you would have like, so many things you could go to, right? Run by the council, or run by all kinds of people in the community, for want of a better word. But like, you wanted to have a meeting, you go and have a meeting. You wanted to, the Greater London Council would put on all kinds of community events, like paid for by the council, right? Like all of these amazing, special, exciting things. Whereas now, you see even like book reading groups or whatever, and you're like, oh, why is this being run by a fashion brand? This kind of stuff, where you're like, God, we really, all of these ways of being with other people are not run by us, or run by the council, or run by things we have any say in. They're shaped so much by these by companies and flows of private capital and private equity through our cities and through our spaces. So that the way in which that fabric has been remade, or like just people's working patterns, people not knowing when they're going to be when they have a shift, right? And people's inability to therefore like be involved in things and plan things longer term. And that means that only a certain kind of person, unless you have someone who's extremely self-sacrificing, has the time to be involved, which is what we saw also during Corbynism and any kind of left. When you go to a left-wing meeting, who do you find? That you find retired people, right? You find sort of very committed, politicized millennials, and then you find like students as well who have more time, right? So it's like the reason people do things is also because they're able to, as well as they want to, and to have that kind of set of community activity, you need the infrastructure and the capacity to make it happen. And I think the possibility of doing that has been eroded. And instead what you have is people quite privately finding stuff out. And in some places people working really, really hard to do that. But just a sort of increase in individualized suffering. Now, there are moments when you see this erupt and something breaks through it. Another example, I guess, would be this kind of popular anti-imperialism around Palestine and the demos and the actions and so on. But those tend to be, or they haven't yet been channeled into institutions, right? So they happen around a thing, but when that thing changes, then the people don't necessarily keep coming back. So it's like, how do we take that desire to act and to make meaning and to think and turn it into something which is can outlive any given event?
Yeah. You mentioned the GLC. And
Yes.
one thing that I think is a proper symbol of the disaster of privatization is the old GLC building on the Thames, which is a gorgeous fucking building that used to be owned by us. That was where the mayor sat, or whatever the fuck he was called, the head of the GLC, Ken, when it was Ken. Sold off by Thatcher, is now Shrek Land or some shit like that. And the London mayor, they then built a mayor London Assembly further down the Thames, but it wasn't owned by us. We were renting it out, and now we can no longer afford the rent. So they've moved out of the fucking London Assembly that we built for the mayor and moved somewhere else. And you just think, we had a perfectly nice, gorgeous building that was there, and privatization is what, and who's getting the money? And that brings us to a topic that you do a lot of work around, which is privatization. You work for a think tank, Commonwealth. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Commonwealth?
So Commonwealth is a think tank that looks into, actually in a way, the Shrek experience kind of sums up our work in some really important ways. It looks into questions of the economy and questions of public ownership. So we have the GLC, and that leads us to the Shrek experience, right? So you have local democracy doing these really innovative attempts at funding models and job creation, and thinking about how can we make people's lives better by intervening in different ways in this thing, the economy, and with also an attunement to culture and democracy, right? It's local government, but in a kind of exciting and innovative ways. And then what you have is a situation where there's a de-democratization. They get rid of the GLC, which is also extremely unpopular. They have to. This is one of the dismantling of the left's thing. They break the union and they break the power of local councils and the GLC. So there's a de-democratization there. Another thing, and this is I think really important and speaks to a lot of contemporary things, which is the GLC was really involved in housing, right? And if we think about bits of London, there were boroughs in London where at that high point, half of the housing was council housing. Now that's been broken up as well. So you have a process of recommodification. So you had things that were taken out of the market and were given to people on the basis of need in a quite straightforward sense. People need homes. And they were put back into the market. And there's a very high number of former council flats which are now being rented out. And everyone who's young in London has seen this.
I know. It's so common. I just want to jump in there and say that you see all these council houses, and particularly the ones that were like early 20th century built, that are like really good quality and better quality and lots sought after. And what you have there is often private owned. Maybe it's like a single landlord who very often doesn't live in the country. So like thousands of pounds are like leaving the country. And you go in there and it's kind of like professionals. I know people who are like doctors, architects, living in these council built houses and paying like over £1,000 a month, £1,400 a month. And you think, so where the fuck are the families living? If you've got lots of single professionals living in these ex-council houses, where are just families living who are not architects?
And that's one way in which the taking these things out of being publicly owned means that you can't match it up to need. And there's a massive, big housing lists, right? And the housing lists are obviously bigger for larger families. So if you have a system where you have a lot of things which are owned by the council or publicly owned in other ways, then you can say, okay, we have this many 4-bedroom houses, we have this many people on the list, whereas that's disrupted by the taking these things out. So you have the loss of something which was once held by everyone, right? Housing, or, in which, and you hear stories about people, in the 80s, even into the 90s, you just, like, if you put your name on the council housing register, you would get a council flat. And that was also one of the quite beautiful things about it, was that it was, for a time and in particular places, something which was for everyone. So you had a mixing of class there. This is
what I'm actually quite interested in, is because I'm not sure if it happened under a Labour government, but basically anyone could have lived in a council house.
Yeah.
And then at some point they said it's only for the most needy, which is like a destruction of universal principles, which is often the first step at destroying public services. And so then what you then have is these estates lose any kind of wealth because there's not people who can afford to spend money in shops there and whatever. And so then you get essentially ghettoization. So is there stages of how these things get?
I think that overall timeline is right. I think when exactly it happens depends on different sort of local aspects, but I think with the way in which homes were taken out of public ownership, that's the most decisive factor there. Basically, is there becomes a shortage when there was more, right? And if you hear people talking about London in the 80s, you just go to the council office. I mean, it's not like next day, but you could get a flat, and that now is just not the case at all.
My mum could even say no. She had options. That's what she tells me. She didn't get that now. She was like, no, I don't want to live there. And she was, whereas it's kind of like, you live there, doesn't matter how safe it is, doesn't matter how close it is to your community, you live there.
Some of it is also, I think in the case of London, I can't speak for the rest of the country, London has a reducing population for some of these decades. There's like a sort of white flight kind of thing going on. People are leaving London. There are bits, if you look at, I don't know if you're like, I remember when I was a kid, this is like before they made the overground real fancy, if you went on the train, there'd just be lots of unused space, right? Like run down bits of London. But it's not that we're not talking on the same scale as like New York in the 80s.
But like Shepherd's Bush used to be like that. East London used to be massively like that.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And like you would have, whereas now, and no disrespect to people from Surrey, but you have a lot of people who like before would have raised their kids in Surrey and now are like, I want to raise my kids in Peckham. Or this kind of basically the desirable thing to do is to live in London. And I don't think that was the case in some of those decades. So as well as the kind of loss of some of the housing stock, it was just that fewer people wanted to live in London. I can't speak to the rest of the country, but I think there was that dynamic, and that meant that there's more and more pressure on housing as well in general, because I think that's a really big shift, I think, and that's, I'm not saying that's either a good or a bad thing. I think it's like it's easy to blame people from Surrey, but it's like we have to talk about this in terms of general trends and general what is generally happening over time. But it seems like that's a pretty decisive shift. But back to the Shrek experience, the other aspect is the ownership aspect, and as you say, they buy they build this new city hall, they can't afford it, they sell it. I think I might be wrong, but the old GLC building is owned by Japan, so it's like, oh my God. So we don't even own it. It's Shrek. It's Shrek. We're leasing it to Japan and Shrek. And
well, that's so much with so much of those old publicly owned utilities or whatever. It's like the German government has a stake in it, or the Japanese, or whatever it is. And it's kind of like, I remember that during the Corbyn years, it was kind of like, oh, so we're subsidising German trains by paying like £200 to get to Leeds. Yeah,
so these are all major owners in loads of privatised utilities. And another big one, I'm not sure how they got in there so much, but the Canadian Teachers Pension Plan owns huge bits of infrastructure. And what happens as a result is that the company, the whether it's the private equity companies or the private equity firms or these national other states, they aren't really interested in investing in the infrastructure because if you own their bits of infrastructure, like say you own the tracks or say you own whatever bit it is, you make money because you own it. You don't make money by investing in it. So you don't even act like a regular hard-nosed capitalist where you think, well, I'll put some money in this. And one thing, for instance, water, there haven't been any new reservoirs built since privatisation.
Yeah, water is kind of one of the most shocking ones.
Yeah.
I think I read, what did you've got it on your website that like a quarter
of the bill
that we pay for water is just profit.
Yeah.
And yet we're talking about shit in our lakes. We're talking about like no reservoirs being built. We're talking about leaky pipes and stuff like that. And you kind of think it should be, if you like capitalism, for example, and you want it to function properly, then you should be in favor of something that has a natural monopoly being broken up or being in the public domain.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work basically. And what happens in all of these cases is that these profits are backstopped, these dividend payments, whenever are backstopped by public money, and because they also know that, as we saw with the railways, when things get into a really dire state, those guys can go away. They're just like, we're out of here, you deal with the mess. Because these things, the lights have to go on, right? The trains have to run. They have a lower risk than investments elsewhere. And, you know, they make a lot of money from the fact that we're reliant on them, right? It's also that the way that privatization happened was that these systems, which were once integrated, were broken up into different bits and really fractured bits, especially in the energy system. So you have different people running generation, the grid, all of these things are separate. And that creates within that even more of those kind of perverse incentives to not invest, to not act in the way that sort of the regular function of capitalism would, because what you want to do is just use it for as much money as you can get. And that's it creates particularly bad outcomes.
Who are these people? Who are these people? That's what I find quite fascinating. Who is making this money? Who bought the Royal Mail, for example, and is making loads of money from it? Who is making loads of money from water? Yeah, that's what that's what I want to fucking know. Like these guys that are walking around, and every now and then, like what I found funny after Free Luigi, was that loads of CEOs started like taking their profiles off of websites. Because they obviously because they have a sense that people don't like them, and I get that some of it will be perhaps private equity firms and like pension funds, like you said, but like you just have this sense, I think there's this sense with the nihilism that we were talking about, that they're all in on it, right? So the government, not only do they not have the balls to kind of say, like, stand up and do what's needed to be done, they're probably also in cahoots with these people, you know?
There's this sort of revolving door, especially in lobbying about infrastructure and water and these kinds of things. And like, you know, it's the way we've set up the system, it's more expensive, right? We pay much more for much less. And government steps in to subsidise. But they are also, I mean... sorry, let me try and figure out who actually owns it.
I mean, it's not like we're going to go to his house and find him.
Wow.
Give it back.
So,
but like, it does kind of feel like with the water and stuff, there needs to be... What are they doing with the water? Are they nationalising the water?
I don't know.
There was some talk of it.
There was some talk, especially of Thames Water. I think when there are really striking failures, they sort of they go for it. But yeah, so we've got... 28% of water bill goes to paying dividends and financing debt. 4.8 billion withdrawn by investors from the water system.
I suppose it's just faceless people, isn't it? Who put money in and want money to get out. And I guess as soon as the thing is with something like a publicly traded company is they are legally obliged to maximize the profits for their shareholders,
Yeah.
right? Which is not how water companies should be functioning.
No, because you want the water to be good.
Yeah, well, exactly, and you also want it to be. What I would like to know, right? So there's this privatization with Thatcher where she's like selling things off,
Yeah.
and then there's a different type of privatization that comes with Blair, where it becomes more outsourcing and consultancy.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened then? Because that wasn't like Thatcher's kind of like selling the water, selling the rail.
Yeah. This sort of selling the family wealth kind of thing. So that sort of stuff, I guess, is more like, and I guess it's things you see in the NHS and education, where it's not privatized, right? But you have people able to come in and make money in the NHS, or come in and you have like the academization of schools, and you have a shift in what those things are, as well as people extracting money, or higher education, the market. You say you have a marketization of it, but you don't have a privatization. But there are private companies who can come in and make money. So that might be things like student halls companies, right? And I think the biggest property deal in Britain so far, because there will be bigger ones, was for like student accommodation, because there are ways that these sort of public services can become useful to these companies, because you have a guaranteed sort of flow of income, or a guaranteed market, whether that's in students or in NHS purchasing power. And if you can kind of get your foot in the door, then there's lots of money for people to be made in doing that. So it's a different kind of thing versus the selling off of railways or so on. I guess that stuff is kind of present almost quite quickly after the selling off. There's this really funny story where, well, it's a ridiculous story where they get McKinsey in to run to look at the company that the
McKinsey is like a consultancy firm, yeah,
to do a private to run the newly privatized rail infrastructure, right, the actual tracks. And McKinsey, they come up with a stroke of genius, which is that they say, we don't need any engineers working on this anymore because engineers cost money. We just don't worry about them. So they fire all the engineers. They're going to go engineer free. And as you can expect, this does not end very well at all. They stop knowing when there are problems in the rail, obviously to the same extent, and you end up in a situation where you have a degradation of the infrastructure. You have a succession of really serious rail incidents, rail crashes where people die because they've gone in and they said, this is how it's going to be run. You also have then a loss of public expertise and public knowledge, right? So you lose out on having people working in those jobs, and you lose that kind of reservoir of knowledge. And again, then if we're talking about rebuilding that state capacity to actually build stuff and do things and have a functioning system, something that, we've had decades of exposure to this extremely extractive approach to public services, where you don't have the personnel and you don't have that capacity to make things happen. And this, I think, is also connected to this feeling that people have that nothing works and that nothing changes. And if something changes, it's only going to get worse, because that speaks to what it's like to get on a bus or a train. And, that speaks to the fabric of their everyday life, because they see things are getting worse. Politicians promise all kinds of things, but nothing changes except to get worse. It
feels like corruption, right? It does, yeah. And it's obviously baked into the system, so it's not technically corruption, but it seems to have this. It seems to be having the same corroding effect that corruption has, and it's only because, when was that? When did that happen in McKinsey?
McKinsey, that's in the early 2000s.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
because even just like that, the New York thing with the last mayor that they had, where he paid some consultancy firm millions and millions to come up with wheelie bins to put their bins in. And you think that is literally corruption. Like somebody, it's like when a dictator pays himself to and you're kind of like, how do we stop this? Because essentially does the Commonwealth, your think tank organization, have an answer to how we stop this? Because as you'll see, that any attempt to stop it, there'll be a massive pushback because there's a fucking massive gravy train that these people are on. They're like consultancy addicts that are getting paid millions to do fuck all. And they're going to do anything to stop anyone who tries, you know?
Yeah, there is, you know, I mean, this is quite a silly incident, but I don't know if you remember when Ed Miliband was a leader of the Labour Party and like he floated some kind of like economic ideas, broadly positive sort of thing. There was something like an early version of the mansion tax and some nationalising some kind of things or whatever. Can't remember the exact details. But he went on TV show and my lean class, I think, pointed at a glass of water and said, "You'd nationalise that, wouldn't that? You take that away." There's this like outrage at the possibility of doing it. But I think one way to do it is that these systems are all getting very close to failure. So if you wanted a kind of timid way of doing it, or a slower way of doing it, well, the next time something stops working, step in on good terms so that the public doesn't lose out from that. And we've done some work on the legality of how you could do it without huge cost to the public. You step in and you take the service out of their hands, or you think about how you do that, you know, over time. Because you know, one of the things with privatisation is that it created a problem which is really expensive to fix, and that you need really strong political will to fix, because you've just had these decades of a total lack of investment in infrastructure, a total lack of investment in capacity, and to rebuild requires really, really strong will. But we also have this kind of temporality of it where things are going to fail, and that's one moment. If you wanted to take a slower approach, you could take them in as they stop working as an emergency. But you know, these things are very expensive to run this way as well. They're being well,
we pay for it twice, right? Because
Exactly.
we're paying it through government subsidies and we're paying it for ourselves
in our bigger bills. Exactly, right. So there are financial advantages that would come from bringing things back in house, and also because the cost of borrowing is lower for governments than it is for private companies, there are ways in which they'd be cheaper to run as well. And the benefits, you know, the other thing is that some of these systems, well, they're all extremely important, obviously, but some of them are really important for the energy transition. So having the energy system the way it is, divided up, parcelled off and owned by different people, doesn't really help us to do a green transition. So there's a kind of security and future question around this stuff too. So it's like there's a kind of, if the government wants to bury its head in the sand and say it's going to be fine, well, it's not, because these services are going to continue on failing, and there are some things which are so important to enable us to meet other goals that they probably can't be left in the hands of these private companies. So I guess, you know, there are ways to do it more slowly, but I think courage in the face of the reality of the situation is needed. And these things are, if it's not done, we'll see that degradation of services and degradation of democracy and that loss of again, this thing of collective life and shared meaning.
Yeah, everything will get worse.
Worse.
What do you think of Zara Sultana's nationalise everything thing? I feel like that woman from Question Time. Nationalise sausages.
Exactly. Would you nationalise this? What would you nationalise?
But I mean, what do you think of that as an argument anyway?
Yeah. Well, I guess nationalising the commanding heights of the economy, nationalising all of these really important bits of infrastructure, probably those things are important. Nationalising in an abstract sense, yes. Or I guess it points to this question to me of what can these new party forms, or whether it's your party or the revitalised Greens, what kind of thing can they do in this moment? And like what stuff should they be doing, and what kind of agenda should they be putting forward? And to my mind, their ability to kind of hold Labour's feet over the fire and say, well, you thought you were always going to be able to rely on particular voters, and now you can't, and to be putting out a kind of more radical economic challenge, or to be really outspoken in establishment circles, but not outspoken in public circles in terms of imperialism, in terms of in terms of the British complicity in the British complicity in the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Being outspoken on those issues is a really useful thing for them to be doing, because it really pushes it shows that there are people who are
who care about it who will like make them pay with their votes.
Exactly.
I just wanted to ask you about, what did you think about Rachel Reeves and obviously the budget, all of that stuff, but I'm more interested in the period around the budget when she decided to like do a Times interview where she accused everyone of sexism. And like, I don't know, I have thoughts on it, but like I'm open to what you might have to say, because to me it felt like she was trying to use feminism to discipline people into criticizing her. But then I've heard some people say that like she is being treated in a different way than other people.
I think both of those could be true, right? It could be the case that one is treated differently, and I think we don't know the details, but that, you know, there's there's an experiential quality that we don't always know. You know, you are treated differently as a woman, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to criticize you or shouldn't be able to, or that the objects of those things are quite different, right? Like, does it mean the public at large shouldn't criticize her? Does it mean the press shouldn't criticize her? Those don't seem to follow from the fact that she might be being treated differently. I mean, one is always treated differently as a woman, right? But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to criticize. It depends on the nature of the criticism, right? So it seems like they're both true. And I think one thing that we saw, and I was glad to have seen what I thought was the back of it, but perhaps not, was this sort of real instrumentalization of a kind of particular version of liberal identity politics, where it's like, don't criticize this person, she's a woman, and actually, you know, we don't have any, or saying we need women in these positions, without thinking, well, it matters what the women are doing and saying, right? And there's an almost patronizing aspect to it, where it's like, well, if you're a woman, then you're speaking on behalf of all women and you're able to do that. Whereas actually women, I don't want to be shocking, like, disagree about all kinds of things, especially politics, right? Or especially, you know, the experience she has of being a woman in those kinds of environments could be all kinds of things, but that doesn't really say very much about what people should think about her performance or her politics necessarily, right? It is always the case that you know, there are gendered scripts play out in how the press deals with people and so on. But I think people do, women in political positions are quite cynical sometimes, and use that to silence criticism or to limit people's ability to say that they disagree with what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's two things in that. One, I guess, having representation does kind of reflect the society we're in, but what they try and do is they say that, like, oh, David Lammy or Rishi Sunak, their achievements are my achievements because we're the same race, or we're the same gender, or we're the same sexuality. When in actual reality, that is your own personal career goals. And what you're doing as Rachel Reeves is using your gender to defend your political project, not push forward feminism. And in a way, having the week before the budget a whole kind of thing about Rachel Reeves being mansplained to kind of like makes the whole thing unserious in a way, and kind of damages feminism.
Well, it means that people, when people hear claims about feminism, are worried it's going to be cynical, right?
Yeah.
They're worried that someone's going to be using it to cut short criticism, or to sort of be a question of manners, like, you shouldn't say that to a woman, which isn't really what feminism's about, right? Like,
what is feminism for you in 2025?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think there's a few aspects to it. I suppose there's a question of what is the movement feminism, what's that doing now? And there's a question of what feminism could be or should be, right? And maybe there's a slightly different questions. I think I think if I were to come up with a definition, it's about, but then these just need more definitions. It's about liberation, overcoming the ways in which gender limits, right? That's a pretty minimal definition, but that seems maybe useful and okay here, that that people are expected to behave a certain way, people face particular harms because of ideas about who they are, right? And feminism is one way of addressing a certain set of harms relating to gender. I think one problem is that feminism, at least in these sort of elite and establishment forms, has really focused on, again, there's quite cynical deployment of identity as a way of forestalling critique, as a way of policing manners, right? Or the other thing it's done has been extremely reactionary and extremely transphobic and has been uninterested in the lives of women who are outside of those professional classes, right? And has been not only inattentive to them, but on purpose excluded them. So this question of what feminism is also this question of what this movement practically looks like. Feminism, I suppose, is one of those things where, what makes an act a feminist act? Well, there are always people who are going to say, no, I don't want to put up with this. I want to be free. I want my life to be different to how it is. But it becomes a sort of organized movement when people get organized and do stuff together. And again, I think there are ways in which we as feminists could be doing more to organize in that way. Lots of people are doing things, but to build those to rebuild some of those institutions where action and thinking can happen.
Organize to achieve what?
Well, that's a good question. So that's in some ways, like, if we think about class, if we think, what do communists want to do? Well, they want to expropriate the expropriators, the people who currently own the means of making value, of taking things. The expropriators who currently own the means of production, right? So you want to take that stuff away from people. Feminism, the goal is maybe less concrete, or it's more about building a world in which gender doesn't create the harms it presently does. So there might be all kinds of goals that come underneath that, right? So it might be fighting for or fighting against rollbacks to rights around abortion or contraception, or maybe pushing for bits of where there are sort of ways to challenge how those norms shape. And I think one thing on that is, one thing that I found very troubling is the resurgence of a really quite reactionary set of social scripts around dating. And if you watch, obviously everyone watches short form video content. If you watch short form video content, what you see is a set of ways of making sense of the world, of relations between men and women, which are just like, I thought that they make the stuff of men are from Mars, women are from Venus look like a progressive. There's all this stuff about men must pay for things, and this must happen, and this must happen, and this is how to kind of up your position in the dating market, and all of this kind of stuff that I thought was passé is now really, really common. Yeah. Well,
I think I've heard it said that feminism has focused on allowing women to access traditionally male spaces and male positions, and not focused as much on making traditionally female positions acceptable to men. So therefore, traditionally female positions remain lower paid, lower positions, less respected. And so that's still attached to this. So what we still have is the idea of being a man and being in control, being powerful is attached to masculinity, and being of service or being a carer or looking after children or something is considered to be low status and low power. And the danger that men become dangerous when they feel like they're vulnerable, when they feel like they are their masculinity is being questioned or things like that. So what do you think about that? Is there anything in that?
I think one thing with gender, and maybe other things are like this too, but gender is particularly like this, is that there's more space to shape what these things are like than maybe in some other things. Like there's room to change what people's expectations are, but there's still always this punishing possibility of someone saying, no, boys don't cry, or this is how you need to behave if you're a woman, or whatever. That kind of disciplining thing can come in, right? But there's room to shape things, and it seemed for a while that there were sort of countervailing or counter-hegemonic ways of being a man or being a woman, that, you know, I mean, I guess a really significant change, it's a small issue, but I think it points to a significant change. If you imagine the stereotypical like 1950s film, you have imagine like a heterosexual couple and the wife is giving birth, right? The man is outside the hospital smoking. He's not even in the room. But by the 1990s, the man is in the room. This is seen as like a shared activity in some way, right? There are shifts in the way that gender is lived out. And there are areas where this doesn't happen as much. The reasons I think are complicated. Some of these cultural things you said, where when sectors are associated with women or activities are associated with women, they're less well paid. But these things can shift too. Like and they also sometimes, actually, if we think about caring, if we think about bits of the care sector, of course, women are massively overrepresented, but you have lots of men working as carers too. Mm-hmm. And the introduction of men hasn't pushed up those wages. So there's a question of why is it that there's a stickiness, or there are gendered associations in some places, and some particularly poorly paid things. I think to make sense of why that is, we have to look at the sort of economics of each sector. Because it's sometimes more confusing, but I think it's generally, or more complicated, it's generally the case that being seen to be a woman, there are some men, I find at least, who whatever they have, however badly things are going for them, the thing they can fall back on is, well, at least I'm not this less good thing. At least I'm not a woman, right? And that comes out in ways that are upsetting, right? You can be thinking you're having a conversation with someone who sees you as an equal person, and then you realize that actually they feel threatened or something's gone wrong or whatever, and they're like, well, you know, whether that's a kind of romantic rejection or some kind of they feel insecure in some way, or they have this thing, this last stick to kind of beat you with, which is like, well, I'm not a woman. So there's still that thing going on, but there have been ways of remaking what it is to be a man and a woman, and those have come from all kinds of places. But if you think about, you know, how strict these conventions have been and how much they can shift, and that speaks to the possibility of changing things in people's lives, but then these sort of constraining facts, you know, of limitations around, you know, if you have a cultural expectation, a societal expectation that women do the bulk of child rearing, and then that's not paid, right, you're going to set up gender relations in a particular way. So there's a sort of complex interplay between the economic and the cultural, but there are ways in which there's room to change what it is to be a man and a woman. And I think one thing we've seen with this sort of, and I don't think, I'm not trying to fearmonger or say this is universal, but in terms of the kind of things that especially younger people are seeing of ways of inhabiting these gender roles, well, I've said that things can change, but they can also get worse, right? With the deepening association between masculinity and a particular kind of strength, a kind of power over, right? Or femininity with a kind of supportive role or withdrawal from public life. I guess the kind of flexibility of it means that things can go backwards, or, well, however we want to understand it, but things can shift in a way which we think is not good for freedom and not good for equality. Yeah,
I think what you said about this kind of reactionary traditional view of kind of dating appearing online, I do think there is a concerted effort by the right to kind of push this. Yeah. But I am skeptical about how common or how prevalent it is in the real world. Yeah. And I even think that a lot of these young right-wing men who might associate themselves with kind of the manosphere in the real world are not actually as conservative as they feel like. I think a lot of these men are in workplaces with women.
Yeah.
They don't actually have an idea of like a 1950s kind of lifestyle. And I do think there is this sense of like, we're in this together, and maybe I would like to pay every now and then just to like make me feel like I'm doing something for you. But I also think you're correct in the sense of everything can go back. And essentially at the core of, in my opinion, at the core of a man is the fear that his manhood is going to be challenged. So then you have to teach young men a definition of manhood that is not fragile and fearful, that looks like someone not being dependent on you, but you being supportive of each other, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of happening more and more. And I think the danger that young men are facing is that women do not need men for financial security as they used to, but people need each other for different things. And so like basically teaching men to be equipped with different things that isn't just I can pay the bills would make people less fragile, less fearful. Like you said, like being rejected feels like a existential attack on some people, and then they lash out with violence when actually everyone is rejected all the time. This is a part of human experience, and it does not mean that like no one will ever love you. I don't know.
I think there's a few things I want to say here. One is that that because dating is this inherently vulnerable thing, right? You don't know what the other person's thinking. You don't know what you're thinking. You know, it can go really wrong, right? And it requires a kind of courage and a tolerance and okayness with risk that is really hard for people to muster. So we see all kinds of kind of pathologies around this. One is that a lot of people sort of just withdrawing from the risk and withdrawing from, however we want to term it, the dating market or whatever, and saying, I'm not doing that, preferring sort of at distance interactions. Another is the use of these very comforting social scripts where avoidance do this, or men do this, or high value people, or whatever, do this, because that's a really comforting way to deal with this fundamental mystery of other people. And that mystery is present all the time. You know, you get it in the workplace, you get it like, we don't know what's going on in someone else's head. But it's especially heightened in terms of dating. And that's in terms of dating also, sometimes you don't know what's going on in your head. Suddenly you're like, wow, I can't sleep, I can't eat, you want to show up at someone's house, like all of this kind of stuff, right? So like you see the unreason of yourself and others in dating. And one way that people cope with that, because it's psychologically difficult, is by clinging to these things which give very full answers to questions where there aren't really answers, right? Why did he do that? He's an avoidant. Why should I not go on the second date? Oh, he didn't pay, right? So I think it's that into this gap of mystery, all kinds of stuff is filled. And I think the second thing I want to say is that this kind of mystery, the mystery of other people, is something that that is always present. So you say we're very well organized. We get everyone to where they need to be. Everyone's as useful as they can be, and we do a revolution. Okay, it's done. Everything's great. It's great. Everything's nationalized, the economy, we've abolished the value form, we've done everything, we're having a great time. Even then, this mystery of other people, of how to live, of the suffering, the vulnerability, even if we say we set up a revolutionary committee for gender norms and we made it as good as it could be, even still there would be these forms of suffering, this heartbreak, wanting, not wanting, yearning, whatever it is, right? Even still, this sort of layer of mystery would be present. And then we get this very lucky question of how do we live our lives in that layer of mystery without the other stuff sort of impinging on it. And it's not to say that, the other factors don't shape that, because they do. But this problem of other people and this problem of ourselves, if we had that never goes away, right? But it would play out differently in a different kind of society, right? So that's where some of this really frantic and reactionary stuff comes from, is because it's trying to make sense of this really fundamental gap. And one horizon of freedom would be, well, what would we do with our time? What would we do with our lives? How would we love each other if the other stuff was less constrained? If we had more freedom to live and love and act and work in different ways, and that could be a really beautiful world.
So you set up a speed dating night, didn't you?
I did.
How did that go?
Well, it was great.
Did you find someone?
So I thought, okay, so it was me.
Wait, did you date in it yourself?
No, I was just hosting, but I thought that would actually play out well for me, but it didn't. So it was me and Tomasha were hosting it because we thought we need girl boy, you know.
Bring in different audiences.
Exactly, yeah. and I think the men were very soothed by him. So a lot of the men it was hard to get men to attend, harder than women.
I do feel like men like Tomasha.
They were so soothed by him. Like sometimes a man would be wavering and I'd say, Tomasha's presenting. Tomasha will be there. And they go, okay. Or they go, isn't he a boxer? I'm like, yeah, it's one of the strings to his best. He does everything. And they're like,
he does
okay.
MMA, he drinks pints.
Exactly. Pints, Arsenal. He'll be there. So that encouraged them. We found that, women sold out very quickly, a few hours. Men did sell out. We really wanted it to be gender balanced because it has to be, doesn't it? But basically, and this won't be a surprise at all, people really want in-person interaction. It makes sense, right? You can tell if you fancy someone pretty quickly, whereas if you're messaging someone on an app, you don't know. And then, you whatever. And also you can be surprised because I think there are so many choices on dating apps that people have quite arbitrary cutoffs, right? Whether like, obviously the famous one is height, but like sometimes someone will talk about like, I don't know, they like tennis. And you might just think, oh, do I want to date someone who likes tennis? And you're presented with ways of having to remove options, whereas in that kind of environment it's a bit like being at a party and you're like, oh, you're
what is this? Yeah,
exactly. And you're like, oh, tennis, okay, cool. So you do that every weekend, great. But I think I won't be so crude as to go into the numbers, but the odds of some kind of action were like nearly 1 in 10 for attendees, which is quite good going. Yeah. For the straights. Yeah. We are talking about the straights here.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay, Amelia. Look, I've got my questions, my final questions for you.
Yes.
You've had a little bit of time to think. Mm-hmm. What is something you've had enough of?
Short form video content.
Short form video content. Well, and this is going to be clipped into a fucking short form video, just so you know.
You go. Well, sometimes
apart
it's all right.
This channel.
If you're watching this is short form and long form, all form, mid form.
But why have you had enough of it?
People are destroying their attention spans, basically.
And TikTok.
End TikTok. Turn off the internet. I think basically the number of people, including myself, I have to be extremely disciplined with my phone. I have things that turn off the apps at a certain time because otherwise you just don't read anything. And I've noticed it also changes. It changes. You hear a song and you're like, that's a song from a reel. And it's changed the way that everything else, because everything else is geared towards getting eyes on screens. It's changed the way TV works as well. Everything is geared towards commanding your commanding your attention in a particular way. And that kind of attention economy, I think, has had really disastrous effects on people's ability to engage with the world, basically.
Okay, and what can't you get enough of?
Can't I get enough of? I think an openness. This is not the best answer, but it's an orientation of openness towards the world. I think this speaks also to this point I was making about dating and people's fear of risk. So it's something about allowing unexpected things to happen, seeing what happens in the world, basically, and being less protective of oneself, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cut.